This is the Week in Sustainability from Sustain Life. It's where our team of sustainability experts and practitioners share commentary to keep you up to date on developing stories and news.
Hello, I'm Melissa Ray, Chief Sustainability Officer of Sustain Life. This is the Week in Sustainability. Thanks for joining us today. Now, frequently on this podcast, we are featuring news around new scientific advancements towards decarbonization, regulatory developments on corporate climate disclosures, and the evolving alphabet soup that is sustainability reporting worldwide. Today, we're going to shift gears a little bit, ever so slightly, and bring you news on Burning Man, specifically recent backlash from environmental groups, which ironically is one of the core pillars of the Burning Man rhetoric and philosophy, around the climate's own climate impact, the festival's own impact and climate related risks. Now, for those of you who don't know, Burning Man, known for its art, music, and radical self expression, has been facing backlash as climate concerns rise worldwide. So let's take a little bit of time to explore how this festival, which started as just a few dozen artists in San Francisco, now draws over 70,000 people annually to the Nevada desert, and how this really fits within the broader context of the climate crisis and the lessons that we can learn from it. So, 2 seconds on Burning Man. Let's begin on what it's all about, right? It's not just a festival. This is a temporary city that rises in Black Rock Desert in Nevada. Participants, or burners as we call them, come together to celebrate self reliance and communal living, all while leaving no trace of their presence in that desert environment. That is, in fact, one of the primary principles and tenets that really underpins the entire philosophy of what the Burning Man community represents, is a commitment to leave the environment unharmed. You may note this is not so different from the core principles underpinning sustainability. So, why have these two come into recent conflict with one another? As the Burning Man attendance grows year after year, there's essentially an intensification on its environmental impact. The festival has been facing a lot of backlash around its carbon footprint, its water usage, and its broader damage to the desert ecosystem that hosts it every year. The critics argue that the festival's massive art installations, the transportation required to get the people and the goods to this very remote location, the generators used to power all of the camps and establishments significantly impact the environment. And so, again, really at odds with the leave no trace and do no harm principles that are so core to the rhetoric underpinning this festival. So, let's talk about the realistic impact of what's really happening at Burning Man and why it's been featured in the news so much this week. Of course, the festival did just end, so that's why it's timely. But according to a Grist article, the festival emits as much as 100,000 tons of CO2 a year. So, to put that in context, that's the equivalent of burning over 100 million pounds of coal, which is quite the obstacle to navigate, as the festival actually has a 2030 goal of being carbon neutral and actually removing as many emissions from the atmosphere as it produces. So, where do those emissions come from, right? A lot of it is from the air travel of all of the attendees to get there. And as the attendees have shifted over the years, it's gone from mostly vehicular traffic, driving out to the desert, to air aviation, which we know to be terribly carbon intensive, and not just air aviation, but private aviation and private jets coming to the desert. So that's a good chunk of what we know as our scope 3 emissions. But of course, there's a lot of scope 1 emissions too, right? Again, with the shifting of the demographic into the wealthy, the privileged, the kind of adventure seeking burners who go from their, corporate lives into this desert, it has shifted from more rustic, simple campgrounds to fully powered installations. We're talking diesel powered generators, air conditioned RVs. And while it's still camping, this is a high power, high emissions impact camping. And this is a really interesting kind of distinction because, and now as if an almost cosmic representation of how this event has really come to contradict the environmental principles that it was founded under, the event this year actually ended in torrential rain that were spurred by a late onset monsoon season and hurricane, but that essentially led all of the roads in and out of the campsite completely inaccessible. And that meant that vehicular traffic of both people and supplies were completely stopped. And the attendees, the 70,000 attendees within the festival, had to actually ration their food and water because they had no ability to get supplies into or out of the festival. And now I want to take a second to actually connect this back to the alphabet soup and our frameworks, because so often we are talking about things like the TCFD, right? The Task Force on Climate Related Financial Disclosure. And this is it. This is it playing out in real life. We're talking about festivals or really any business that has an operation or a supply chain in these vulnerable regions that have these intense weather events and what that means for their resilience, for their reliability, for their security. This was real climate related risk posed to the BlackRock community, to the attendees and the festival goers. And so when we talk about the financial impact, there it is, right? BlackRock, I expect, will probably go over some changes now that you have these extreme weather events really posing safety concerns for the attendees and really thinking about how this festival might change in the future. Now, if we're talking about Burning Man, there is one kicker that was highlighted in the news that I'd be remiss if I didn't speak to, and that's its own not in my backyard issue. So, a core pillar of environmental justice, for those who don't know, not in my backyard is a principle that essentially indicates that people with perceived social, racial, or economic privilege basically object to the development of seemingly good projects and services in their backyard. So, for example, we all love recycling. Recycling's a good thing, right? But don't build a recycling plant in my backyard. That's going to be unpleasant for my community. That's going to decrease property values by introducing that kind of operation, right? That's a clear example of not in my backyard. And so, what was Burning Man's not in my backyard moment? It came around a renewable energy project, specifically geothermal. The Bureau of Land Management, which owns the land, the public land that the festival hosts its event on every year, had actually approved a geothermal exploration project to essentially understand, could there be energy extracted from the Earth's natural heating that could be used as a renewable energy source to heat, cool, power homes in the region. And that project had been approved. And the Burning Man event organizers not only opposed the project, but actually got the local community that had previously also approved the project to oppose it. And they did this under the opposition that pursuing a project like this would significantly disrupt the local environment and ecosystem that is the BlackRock National Conservation Area that hosts this festival every year. And that's somewhat ironic of a complaint to listen to this lawsuit, right? Because the introduction and influx of 70,000 people into a traditionally vacant and uninhabited desert environment certainly does exactly just that, right? Interrupting the desert environments. Also included in that lawsuit was the claim that the project hadn't gone through the proper approval processes in its permitting process, specifically with a local indigenous tribe and not seeking input in the environmental impact and review. Now, for those that want a deeper dive on permitting reform and some of the problems in permitting or challenges, I should say, in the US system, we did an episode on that a couple of weeks back, so check it out. But, we went off script a little bit this week to give you the Burning Man news because it's a really interesting example of how a real life event touches on some of these more philosophical or theoretical foundations of how we think about climate opportunities and climate risk and climate impact. And so this is a real world example of those two things really, really coalescing. So what that means for the festival, we don't know. I expect there will be some adjustments to how it is managed in the future, especially as these increased weather events are, of course, expected to increase in frequency given the warming climate. So that's what we have for you this week. Thanks so much for tuning in. This was the Week in Sustainability, and we'll see you next week.
Sustain Life is the leading and most comprehensive sustainability software on the market. To learn how we can help your company measure its emissions and take climate action, go to sustain.life. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this show on our YouTube channel or your favorite podcast platform. Thanks for tuning in. See you next week.